It's time for The Outspoken Cyclist, your weekly conversation about bicycles, cyclists, trails, travel, advocacy, the bike industry, and much, much more. You can subscribe to our weekly podcast at outspokencyclist.com or through your favorite podcatching app to listen anytime. Now here's your host, Diane Jenks.
Hello and welcome to The Outspoken Cyclist. I'm your host, Diane Jenks. Thanks for joining me today. Today's episode is about one man and his life as told in a new documentary, as well as a new biographical novel. Marshal Major Taylor is a name so many of us know, yet what do we really know about the man? Todd Gould is an Emmy award-winning producer and author who lives and works in Bloomington, Indiana. He's also the executive producer of Major Taylor, Champion of the Race, a one-hour documentary that will air Monday, February 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on WTIU, Bloomington, Indiana's PBS station. It will also stream on your PBS Passport app and be available later on this spring on most PBS stations around the country. Todd will be with me to talk about the film in a moment. Then sometimes inspiration at a young age ends up being the direction of your entire life. Such is the case for John Howard, one of the most successful cyclists of our time. Among some of his feats, John won a gold medal at the 1971 Pan Am Games road race as a member of the U.S. Army cycling team. He took first place at the 1981 Hawaiian Ironman, raced in 3 separate Summer Olympics, and came in second in the inaugural Race Across America in 1982. He set a land speed record at the Bonneville Salt Flats in 1985 that stood for 10 years. And of course, he is a member of both the Bicycling and Triathlon Halls of Fame. So what drives someone to achieve this kind of success? In John's case, it was the story of Marshal Major Taylor, the talented and ambitious black cyclist who overcame intense racism to become a world champion at the turn of the last century. John will be with me in the second part of the show. Major Taylor was not only one of the greatest cyclists and athletes to ever compete, he was a gentleman and a pioneer, navigating a world that didn't want African American athletes to survive, let alone thrive. As you will hear in my conversation with Emmy award-winning producer Todd Gould, Major Taylor's story is a timely and fascinating tale that needs to be heard. Hi, Todd. Welcome to The Outspoken Cyclist. Thanks for being my guest today. How are you and how's Indiana?
It's wonderful. Yeah, the weather's starting to get a little warmer and it's the buds are starting to come out on the trees. So that's really good.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're there yet. My husband said he saw daffodils this morning on the way to work, but other than that, I don't know. So yeah. I want to talk about your documentary, Major Taylor, Champion of the Race. It's airing on February 26th on your PBS station, which is WTIU.
That's correct.
Right. In Bloomington. We will let people know at the end of our conversation how they can stream it, and eventually it'll be on all of the PBS stations or through Passport. So let's talk about the title first, because I imagine that it has sort of a double meaning to it, Champion of the Race. It's kind of a very clever title. Most of my listeners know who Major Taylor was, but go ahead, tell me about the title and how you decided upon that.
Well, I think that one of the things that stood out to me a lot about Major's story was what an amazing, not only just an amazing cyclist, an amazing athlete. Certainly he was all of those things, and he set 20 world records and did all kinds of amazing things in the world of track cycling. But what really impressed me was how he negotiated for greater social and economic opportunities for African Americans during the heart of Jim Crow America, during the right at the turn of the 20th century. So to have him figure out how to gain greater agency, how to negotiate contracts to compete in a number of these races, especially ones in towns where he was not welcome, to stay and to stay at a hotel or to eat at a restaurant. This was really the heart of Jim Crow America that he was trying to travel through. And yet he did it with such class and such style that he was referred to as a race man. So that was, and of course, then if you're asking about the title, then of course, then I just started thinking about race, racine, race relations, and so I would argue that champion of the race does have a double meaning, and I think it's very appropriate on both parts.
I agree. I agree. I think it's a great title. A great
Thank you.
title.
Thank
So,
you.
where did you get a lot of the documentation in this film, the information? You've got some luminaries. Another one is on the show with you this week, John Howard, whose book is out right now, The Black
Yes.
Cyclone, which is
Right.
also about Major Taylor. So, this whole show is about Major Taylor.
Yay.
Tell us who else is in the documentary, and then I want to go through a little bit of what you're covering from the start to finish.
Of course. We've had some really great response from people that had heard had heard about Major's story, had felt like maybe it was undertold, underrepresented. His story had been underrepresented, right? And I thought it was interesting that we had a number of different athletes and sports executives, not just African American pioneers, but female pioneers, LGBTQ pioneers, Hispanic, and you know a lot of them reflect back and say, if Major Taylor hadn't done what he did, I wouldn't be able to do what I do, right? So it's more than just about a bunch of old stuff that happened a long time ago, but actually has a rich legacy today that athletes, sports executives, people in social activism, community activism, all see those same themes pop up in Major Taylor's story, and I think it resonates with a lot of people that way.
Let me take a moment to reintroduce you, and then I want to talk a little bit about how the documentary is put together. We're speaking with Todd Gould. He's the executive producer of a new documentary on Major Taylor, Champion of the Race. It will air February 26th, which is Monday at 8 p.m. on WTIU out of Indiana, and you're going to be able to stream it after that or through your PBS Passport app, of which I hope everybody has one. Big fan of PBS here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks. We'll take the plug.
There you go.
Yeah, so just real quick to answer your question from before too, in terms of other luminaries, we had a number of gold medal athletes, top folks at ESPN and the Washington Post. We have Jonathan Jackson, who is Jesse Jackson's son. He's a congressman from Illinois, and he's pushing now currently to get a House resolution bill passed in Congress to posthumously award Taylor with the Congressional Gold Medal.
That's
and
great.
So all these things sort of came together, and it's been wonderful for me to go to all these different places all over the United States to talk to people about this particular history, and each of them in their own ways working to try to remember Major Taylor and his, not only just his life, but his legacy.
Well, it's very interesting that you have original music. You have a mezzo soprano who is actually voicing the documentary. You have, is it Brandon Marsalis?
Sure. So Branford Marsalis. Yeah,
Come on, Diane. You know it's Branford.
Yeah, three-time Grammy Award winner.
Yeah.
Is reading the passages from Major Taylor's autobiography, which is really terrific because that's a lot of first-person accounts, that kind of thing. So it's, I did this, I saw this, I felt this way. There's that kind of power in that. So Branford brings Major Taylor's voice to life through the reading of these passages in his autobiography. And then Marietta Simpson, who is the mezzo soprano from the Philadelphia Philharmonic, and she's the primary narrator for the film. And then Tyrone Cooper, who's a 5-time Emmy Award winner in terms of musical score and soundtrack, is recording. Tyrone and I are pals. We've been together for a long time, and he's scored a number of different documentaries for me. So and they're all just wonderful. And each of these folks lending their time and their talents to this. I think it comes back again to Major's story and how people found his story to be so compelling and that they wanted to be a part of it. So I'm the conduit, they just come through me to produce something really cool. And that's what's.
I get that. I think it's awesome. I think it's just awesome. How long is the film?
60 minutes.
Oh, good.
Yep.
I
So.
mean, you can hardly tell his life in 60 minutes, but I'll bet you can pick up some of the best highlights of it.
Right. And initially I had started out trying to make this show a little longer, more like a feature-length 90-minute film, but I think it was really more of a question of distribution and we could get say two-thirds of the stations across America to pick up a 90-minute show, but we could get, 98% of stations covering an hour show. So I sort of opted to cut it down and have it shared more widely across the US.
It also gives people the opportunity to get a taste of Major Taylor and maybe do a little more digging on their own. I mean, there's a lot
Hopefully.
out there now, and
Hopefully.
more all the time, it seems.
Yeah.
So I want to take a moment to talk about I think it's the 29th, of course, February 29th, leap year, that you're
Mhm.
doing a question and answer session. It's sold out, I understand, at the museum, Indiana State Museum. What are you going to be talking about there, though?
Well, so we'll be screening the film, and that'll be sort of a premiere screening, and then and there's several people in the documentary itself, historians, archivists. Major Taylor's great granddaughter is coming in from Hawaii,
Oh,
and
nice.
so yeah, it's great. And so I thought it might be rather than just do a Q&A with me as the TV producer, I thought it might be more interesting to watch the film and then here's five people you just saw in the film all up on stage and you could ask any one of them questions, because I thought, well, maybe there's certain historians that are going to know a lot more about Taylor's history. There's some that just know about the history of race relations at the time period, and then of course you got Major's great granddaughter and you could actually talk to somebody in Major Taylor's family if you
There you
wish.
go. There you go.
Yes.
Well, a lot of people may or may not know that for all his successes and for all of the records he set and for the competition, his abilities were really unmatched in the day. The man died penniless.
Yeah,
And
I know.
I don't know how you end the film, but I'm pretty sure that it will make people very sad to know that.
Yes, I mean, and we explore that to a certain degree, in terms of what happened for him financially and that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of it had to do with just the pressures of the Great Depression were hitting everybody hard at the time, and Major was just trying to reinvent himself once again. So he was done. He was too old to race anymore competitively. So he opted in, like a lot of the bicycle manufacturers did at the time. They started switching over to automobile production, and Taylor actually got a couple of patents on what was essentially what we call today a steel belted radial tire for automobiles. And so he had been working on that, but then at the same time that he was socking a lot of his own money investing in these car parts. At the same time, he's got a weakened heart. He's got several diseases that are coming on, so there's a lot of physical ailments, and then that takes money and time and resources. And so that, and just simply a 15-year career of just horrible racist practices that he had to face and overcome. And I think it just beat him up. It was just, I mean, it was,
Yeah.
I think I would almost say, I think that he would die of a broken heart because I think he was trying so hard to push out greater opportunity, economic opportunity, social opportunity, cultural opportunity, and he was just the tip of the spear. I mean, it was just him by himself. I mean, he didn't have teammates, he's the only black face in the crowd. And in the United States, that didn't bode well. It did not bode well for him
No.
because there were so many places that did not allow him to stay or to race or to eat. He ends up ultimately going over to Europe for a while, and then there he's treated like a king because the bicycle riders and racers in France just thought he was like this bronze Adonis, is what they called him. A lot of words that were very glowing, excited, and I think he found that agency there, when he was touring around the world. Same thing in Australia for a period of time, but it was a difficult period of time in the late 20s and early 30s, and he was trying to make another go of it and was losing his money and his health as a result. So it is sad, but I will say that I couldn't end the documentary that way. I
Good.
just couldn't do it. Yeah. So what I tried to do in the last 5-7 minutes of the show is just talk about legacy and what's all the other things that are going on. Now, you had mentioned to me earlier that you thought that you know the guy is getting a moment now, right? He's getting a place in the spotlight, and there are a lot of efforts. National bike rides, honor Major Taylor bike rides around the United States. I know there's a new initiative up in the Bronzeville district in Chicago where they're trying to restore some areas where Major Taylor had lived for a period of time. Certainly in Worcester, Massachusetts, they do a pretty good job of remembering him
Right.
with the statue and the street and the museum and a bunch of other things that are there in Worcester. So I left it on that note, with school children reading about him, right? With, museum exhibits and in a much more sort of uplifting tone, which I think that's what I would like to think that that's what Major Taylor would have wanted, is to say, let's look at the big picture and see not only just what, I did as Major Taylor, right. But also what we, all of us together, white and black, coming together and making great opportunities happen.
Well, I really appreciate you making this film, and I think people are going to enjoy watching it. I'm looking forward to it. We've been speaking with Todd Gould. He's the executive producer of Major Taylor, Champion of the Race. It airs Monday night, February 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. WTIU out of Bloomington, Indiana's PBS station. You'll pick it up through your passport, and then it'll become available on your PBS station nationwide sometime later this late spring. Thank you so much for making this film. Thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm very excited that Major Taylor is getting his day.
Yay. Yep. That's the goal, right? So, yeah.
Thanks. My thanks to Todd for not only joining me today, but for producing this film. And if you are inclined, let your representatives know that a congressional gold medal is a great idea, even posthumously, for the incomparable Major Taylor. The documentary Major Taylor, Champion of the Race airs tomorrow evening, February 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern on WTIU and streaming on your PBS Passport app. Find a link to the film at outspokencyclist.com or WTIU.org. Let's take a short break, and when we return, we'll speak with cycling great John Howard about his new book, The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot. You're listening to The Outspoken Cyclist. We are back on The Outspoken Cyclist. I'm your host, Diane Jenks. After 40 years of research, traveling worldwide for details about Major Taylor's life, John Howard's new book, The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot, was just published. With access to historical documents, including an original copy of Major Taylor's autobiography, as well as traveling worldwide to delve into places where the cyclist competed and lived, John's biographical novel gives voice to Major Taylor, bringing him to life. Hi, John. Welcome to The Outspoken Cyclist. It's a good time to have a talk with you. I'm so excited. We haven't seen each other or talked to each other in years. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Diane, and it's great to hear your voice after all those years. I think the last time I saw you was in San Diego at the at a bicycle builders convention down in downtown.
Oh, is that the one? What was it? Brian Bayless? That's the one he put on?
I might well have been.
Yeah.
Brian
Wow, that was a
no longer
long
with
time
us,
ago.
but,
Yeah.
That's been a while.
Well, and, I've spoken with people who have been working with you on certain things, like Denise for her land speed record, and other people who go to your School of Champions and have been training with you. But now this is a little bit different. I want to talk to you about your new book, Marshal Taylor, or Marshal Major Taylor. And most people who listen to this show know who Major Taylor was, at least sort of peripherally, but let's dive into it. The book is titled The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot. And I'm hoping that maybe we can unforget him. So What is it about Major Taylor that drew you to him? Because this has been a long time coming, this book.
It has. Major Taylor was born in 1878, which happens to be the same date that my grandfather was also came into this world. So early on as a cyclist, I didn't follow the traditional, especially Midwestern sports like baseball and basketball so much. My focus was on cycling. And from almost the earliest readings, I had an opportunity to read Major Taylor's original autobiography, and I have a historical copy of it today. But during that period, I started getting into cycling on a fairly serious level, and Major Taylor was my hero. To be perfectly straightforward about that, I revered him and his perspective of having to race as a Black athlete in a period when it was very difficult to do that. Most white people could not understand nature's gift of speed, certainly to Major Taylor or other African American athletes, of which there were very, very few in the 1800s.
I like that turn of phrase, nature's gift of speed. It's one I haven't actually heard all at once. And it's really interesting because, in fact, he set speed records. And as we know, many African-American runners and other athletes set these amazing speed records.
Well, it's a phenomenon that can be traced. I don't know how far back we want to trace it, because it becomes a racial issue very quickly when you start looking at the reasons African Americans are so gifted. But it biologically, it comes about from a white muscle fibers. These are the fast twitch fibers in the human body that allow athletes to be labeled slow or fast. Major Taylor had a blend of both. He had extraordinary capabilities as a sprinter, but what is largely unknown is that he also was quite a good endurance athlete. His sponsors, which included Bertie Munger, his coach early on, and Ivor Johnson, which was an arms and cycling dealer back in that era, wanted him to compete in the 6-day race in Madison Square Gardens in 1896. And they pushed that. They wanted him to show his versatility. He didn't have a long time to train for it, and he was only 18 years old at the time. So he had a lot going against him, but his earliest the event that he was trained for was trick riding. And his coach, Bertie Munger, trained him to be the best trick rider. And that would come in handy later on when cyclists tend to want to put him in a box and bring him down to the pole line, whereas other cyclists would be streamlining up at the top of the track to get away. Well, he had to maneuver himself out of those boxes, which continually formed in mass start racing.
So explain what a trick rider actually does.
Well, yes, I really do need to go back to the beginning. Early on, Taylor got his start from delivering newspapers, and he did that on a bicycle. Early Major Taylor, probably in his 8, 9, 10 years old. So he developed some strength early on, and at some point he started doing trick riding. The family that more or less sponsored Major Taylor, the Southard family, very wealthy railroad family in Indianapolis bought him a trick bike early on, and he demonstrated his considerable skill at riding that bike and doing things that few people at the time were able to do. I mean, he could ride the bike while standing on the saddle and one foot on the handlebars. He could do wheel stands. He could balance it in ways that it would be impressive even today. So out of that, as I said, he became very adept at trick riding, which would help him maneuver through the pack when the chips were down, and winning was everything. And I think it's important to point out that cycling was arguably the biggest sport of the time. There was also horse racing and boxing, which came in a close second and third. But cyclists were the best paid athletes in the world at the time. They made money. Not only did they make prize money, but they had salaries from some of their sponsors. So it was a very rich sport. And I think you could say that in its heydays, you went to baseball games when all the seats at the bike track were sold out.
Huh.
That gives you some idea of the impact that it had in those days before the motorcycle and the automobile and the airplane existed, because we were driven to explore speed records. That was a big part of the sporting discovery process, where cyclists would pace behind, when they weren't doing mass start racing, they would pace behind tandems, triplets, quads. These bikes provided a measure of excitement for the public because they kept going faster and faster and faster. And with the advent of the motorcycle platform, which of course evolved from bicycles, the speeds became even faster. And these contraptions were mounted to bicycles, such as a bike I have in my museum, Orient Pacing Tandem, and that had a bell on the back for the final lap. Well, it was these tandems that originally were mounted with Didion Béton motors, little single-cylinder motors from France. And they were brought over by people like Albert Champion in crates and assembled on bikes like the Orient, which was a super sturdy bike of the day. And the next thing we know, we have what was known as motorcycles. And motorcycles, of course, quickly developed into their own game, but for quite a long time, the primary objective of the motorcycle was to pace cyclists on the tracks and the velodromes of Europe. Immensely popular. It brought cycling to another level. You have to remember that baseball, boxing, horse racing, and basketball, football all came about and began competing for public attention. So cycling up the ante one more time with the invention of what we today would call motorcycles. So these bikes, always driven, or at least in the very beginning, you'd have the captain who would steer the bike, and then you'd have the stoker who would operate the motor in the rear. Well, it didn't take long before they eliminated the stoker altogether, and the bike was now a single. So that's sort of how the evolution occurred. And of course, a lot of those inventions that, of course, the pneumatic tire, the spiral bevel gear, which became the differential on the Model A Ford. All of these inventions started with bicycles, and they brought post-industrial revolution to another level. And that's when we start seeing the early automobiles and so forth. But I know I'm getting off track here.
That's okay. Let me take a moment to reintroduce you to listeners, and then we're going to talk a little more about Major Taylor and how all of that sort of comes together. We're speaking with John Howard. I will not enumerate his accolades because they are many, and over many, many years. John and I met back in 1985 or 86 when he came here in Northeast Ohio to do a half Ironman, and he gave this really interesting sort of workshop lecture in front of it, and we became friends then. I've known him so obviously a few years. And he has done RAM, and he has won the Ironman, and he was our U.S. national champion umpteen times. Did you or did you not race for the Army? Is that right?
That was one of the first things that I did, Diane. I was fortunately selected. Most of my company ended up in Vietnam, but it was a period when we were evolving from the all draft era in the military to the all volunteer, and it was important for the military services, and that included all the military services, to offer young men, because at the time young women didn't participate,
right,
in an athletic program, which would so we were really the first sports advocates in the military, and we had a facility back in Fort Hamilton, New York, and on Staten Island, and that was the Army's first real cycling team. Actually, there was one in '64 as well with Jack Symes and a few other luminaries of the sport. But '68 was the organization of all branches of the service, and we all served and competed in bicycle racing and traveled to Europe for the SISM Games, and represented our country in the Pan American Games, which we did well. I won a gold medal in the Pan Am Games, and my teammates took home 3 bronze medals. So out of that, we got to play for the next year and represent. A few of us represented the U.S. In the Olympics in Munich, Germany.
Wow. And that was a very interesting Olympics that I do not really want to get into. Let's take a short break, and we'll be back to talk with John Howard some more. You're listening to The Outspoken Cyclist. We are back on The Outspoken Cyclist. I'm Diane Jenks, and we're speaking with John Howard about his new book, The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot, the historical biographical novel about Marshal Major Taylor. Let's go back to Major Taylor for a second, because he was sort of forced to go to Europe in a way and race in Europe. Let's talk a little bit about the way he was treated as this amazing elite cyclist. I had to have some sort of a jealousy piece to it, but things did not go well for him here in this country.
Well, Major Taylor was the best cyclist I think the world had seen. I think Artie Zimmerman might have had a hand in helping him. Bertie Munger certainly promoted him and trained him. But there were few people who could argue with the level of speed that this man had. He, just to give you an example, on period equipment, he covered a kilometer in 57 seconds, which today would be world record time. Now we're fairly certain that's a rolling start, but if you can relate to a 57-second kilometer, you could those who race bicycles or have some understanding of track racing can understand just how fast that actually is. That was Major Taylor in his prime. He competed a very long time, from I think 1891, his first race. He was an absolute prodigy. At age 13, his employer, Sam Hay, with Hay and Willett Cyclists down on Bicycle Row in Indianapolis. Bicycles were immensely popular in the Midwest. And Hay told him that he would like him to show off his trick skills and promote the bike shop in the process, which he did. And his how the military came into this and Major came into it is somewhat of a subject of debate, but he had a military uniform, a tight-fitting military uniform that Hay wanted him to wear, and that uniform earned him the nickname Major. So that was sort of the beginning of the Major period. I could go on and do go on in the book, but there are very few real stories about exactly how he promoted the Hay and Willett's bike shop. But it so happened that there was an important race that took place on the 4th of July. And of course, Taylor was doing his best to do his tricks in front of the crowd, a huge crowd, thousands of people, because again, cycling was a very popular sport. And this was a handicap race. And just by chance, Tom Hay said to Major Taylor, as he was cooling down from one of his expeditions, he said, "Would you please," actually it was more of an order, he said, "you will ride this race." And Taylor was just astounded. He said, I could get hurt. I could hurt somebody. I'm not trained as a bicycle racer. It's not a good idea. And he started crying. He was 13 years old at the time. And Hay said, "Look, you don't have to finish. Just start the race in the handicap group and go down a few blocks and that's it. You don't have to finish." So when the race started, Taylor, sure enough, there was a crash very early in the race. In the first turn, the beginners were not skilled cyclists at all, and Taylor realized he had to get out of there in a hurry. So on this trick bike, he rode as fast as he possibly could. To make a long story short, he won the race. He beat out Walter Marmon, who was the state champion, and Marmon actually supported him. He won the race, beat Marmon in a sprint, and it was protested. How can this black kid win an important race such as this? This can't be. And the officials wanted to disqualify him. Marmon stood up for him. He said, "No, he beat me fair and square. He deserves the gold medal. Give it to him." And they did. Marmon, of course, went on to great fame with the Marmon Wasp and the great sedans they built. The Marmon Wasp was the first winner of the Indianapolis 500. So on and on. There's a lot of stories like that. One of the most enjoyable parts of the book, I think, is trying to explain all of the various nuances of how the Industrial Revolution was manifesting itself to continually improve the mechanical inventions, such as the automobile and the Wright brothers and their role in developing the airplane. Major Taylor had an engineering mind, and he was fascinated by this technology and wanted desperately, after his retirement, to get into the motor age and the automobile industry, and wanted very much to compete in motor racing. Well, that didn't happen, but onward, apologize for getting ahead of myself. That's exactly how I do when I'm
I know,
trying to
John. I've
explain
known you a
things.
long time.
Right. But I
Okay.
think to describe Major Taylor, he was an extremely enigmatic individual. It was a complicated era because he was a complicated man. He had a lot to deal with, not only with the intense racism, but he had to on his shoulders, he represented African American athletes, and he did that extraordinarily well. One of the very first experiences that he had after, well, I could describe the first experience and early on when he was trying his best to learn the new game of basketball. Athletes of the era were very versatile, and he really wanted to learn basketball. Well, his buds, there were about 5 of them, were ushered into the YMCA in downtown Indianapolis. And as they were coming into the building to sign up to learn the new prep game of basketball, the director called him out. He said, "Your son, you're to one of the white boys who was there. He said, your attendant is not allowed in this facility. He'll have to spend the rest of the time in the gallery watching you play." And so they very reluctantly went through with that. But in his autobiography, Major Taylor refers back to that continually as the monster of prejudice. And that was his first introduction. Prior to that, he led a very safe and innocent life. But very quickly, he was transformed into a different world, a world of bicycle racing, long train rides to races, training on dirt roads, and the persistence of racism and bigotry that would follow him for his entire career.
And did that racism force him to go to Europe? Is that how it happened?
It did, but a couple of things prompted that. And it wasn't easy. Everything in Major Taylor's life was complicated. He was in Savannah, Georgia. We go into a great depth on this one because it happened where he took a train ride to Savannah to get out of the cold weather so that he could train. And while he was in Savannah, he had an encounter with the triplet. Again, remembering that cycling was very, very popular in the South. Atlanta was one of the real hot centers of activity, and some of the greats like Bobby Walthour came out of Atlanta. So the South was very big on cycling, and Major Taylor had a little run-in with a triplet, which was steered by a real, I know only way to put it, sons of the Confederacy, who told him in no uncertain terms that they didn't want him to pace behind their triplet. And he proceeded to drop this triplet, which is not an easy thing to do. And to show his power, he literally rode away from him. Well, by the time he got back to his rooming house in Savannah, a note with a rock tied to it came crashing through the window. And the note basically said, using the N-word, if you're not out of Savannah by sundown, you will be sorry. And he left promptly, only to be to ride a race in the spring in Taunton, Pennsylvania, not far from Philadelphia. And you got to remember, these guys were riding for a paycheck, a big one. So what happened is not clear, but another rider who outweighed Taylor by almost 50 pounds, his name was Becker was crowded on the track at the catch fence, and it was a dirt track, and Taylor put him in there, and whether he did that on purpose or not is anybody's guess, but I think it's safe to say that Major Taylor had a sort of Jekyll and Hyde personality when it came to his racing. He took it very seriously. So what happened was Becker did not qualify, but Taylor did. And as he was cooling down, Becker came up from behind him, grabbed him by the neck, and wrenched him off his bike. His bike went sailing into the infield, and he proceeded to strangle him to the point where he became unconscious for almost 15 minutes. And if it hadn't been for the constable with a billy club, he would have killed him right then and there. So that actually prompted Major Taylor to consider the possibility of racing in Europe. He was in great demand after winning the World Championship in 1899, and also the American Championship in 1898. So everybody wanted to see the World Championship perform, and in Europe it was bring on the Negro Volant. So they were ready to pay Major Taylor an extraordinary amount of money to bring him to Europe. Robert Coquelle and Victor Briere were the two promoters that wanted Taylor, desperately wanted Taylor in Europe. But there was one big problem. Major Taylor was a Christian. He believed wholeheartedly that his power came through his maker, and that God rode with him every mile of the way. And he promised his mother on her deathbed that he would never race on the Sabbath. And that there is a, Diane, indulge me, I want to read a quote here from Aeschylus, who was the father of Greek tragedy. And this, of course, is part of the book. Aeschylus said, "Even in our sleep, pain that we cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." And that quote essentially sums up the Black Cyclone, the whole gamut of issues that Major Taylor had were essentially brought on by his strong belief that God was his power source. And because of that, you have a huge conflict. And the conflict was that Europeans race bicycles on Sunday. The fans go to watch them race on Sunday. And the velodrome circuits of Europe were packed. In order to get Major Taylor to race in Europe, Coquelle and Briere had to revise the contract, which originally would have paid Major Taylor close to $750,000 in today's money. They revised the contract because he said, "I will not race on the Sabbath." And because of that, they literally changed the entire structure of bicycle racing in Europe to see this man compete against Europe's best.
I'm telling you, do not tell the whole book. The book is just sounds fascinating. It sounds wonderful. Let me I want to wrap it up with a couple of things. First of all, we're speaking with John Howard. He's the author of the book, The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot. And I want to get to the forgot part in a moment. There's a documentary about Major Taylor that's going to be streaming February 26th out of Indiana's PBS station, and we'll have a link to that on the website. You have a part in that. What is your part in that documentary?
I am a historical content provider, I suppose you would say. I will be on there, and that documentary is a Todd Gould production. I think Todd is a marvelous documentary filmmaker, and it is headlined with Marita Coleman, who is a wonderful mezzo-soprano opera star, and the voice of Major Taylor is voiced by Branford Marsalis, who was a wonderful saxophone player, as we all know. So I think it's going to be I have not seen it yet, so I don't know what my role is at this point, but
Okay.
But I do know that I will be a part of the production.
All right. Well, here's what I want to wrap up before we tell listeners how to get a copy of the book. I want to know how Major Taylor ended up dying the way he did, and which was pretty much penniless.
Well, again, the complexities, and I can't go into too much detail.
No.
He was a brilliant inventor. In addition to everything else Major Taylor had, in the bicycle factory in Indianapolis with Bertie Munger, who started the business, and later with Ivor Johnson, he learned the trade of machinist. He got a deferment in World War I to stay out of it on the basis of his machining skills. And we believe that his first invention was this incredible spring wheel, which he invested heavily in, as well as Fred Johnson at Ivor Johnson. So what happened was that they were unable to secure a patent, and somebody else essentially ripped it off. So that was sort of the spiraling downward that occurred, and it did not end well for Major Taylor. In spite of being one of the wealthiest African Americans in America and one of the highest paid athletes in the world, he essentially died penniless and was buried in a pauper's grave. It reminds me of the Amadeus story, if you've seen that film.
Yeah.
And it has that sort of blend to it. And yes, we do tell the rest of the story as I think as best we can within the information. But I was very fortunate early in my interest level of Major Taylor to meet Sidney Taylor Brown, his daughter. And through Sidney, I traveled to Pittsburgh twice and made hours of taped interviews with Sidney so that I could get what Paul Harvey called the rest of the story. And that's Sidney's contribution to the book. I'm the only person alive at this point to have actually interviewed her. She died at 102.
Wow.
And I will say that there were a number of pioneers who remembered Taylor, like Alf Goulet, who I met on a sunny day in New Jersey. And Alf also lived to be 102, believe it or not. And he loaned Major Taylor his favorite bicycle for Taylor's final race, the Old Timers event in Newark in 1917.
Wow, what a great way to end this conversation. 1917, that was a long time ago. We've been speaking with John Howard. His new book is The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot. It's a story of Marshal Major Taylor. I think everybody who knows anything about the man or has heard anything will want to read the book. Clearly, you have done your homework and have conveyed it in this book. It's pretty exciting.
Diane, one more thing that I would like to add. Unlike the other excellent biographies on Major Taylor, beginning with Andrew Ritchie and finishing with Michael Kranish, this is not a biography. This is a biographical novel. And unlike the other books, we actually give Taylor and his contemporaries voices. And I think that's the critical difference in understanding. And I feel that my co-author, Renee Maurer, and I can do that because of the research, the level of research that I've been doing for over 40 years. I've traveled to Paris. The Bibliothèque in Paris was a wonderful source of information, as was the Rum Library in Sydney, Australia. I traveled to Sydney to the cricket grounds to see. Of course, that track is long gone, as is the Parc du Princes in Paris. But some of the places still have a sort of aura to them, and the microfiche labs are just full of information about Major Taylor. So from that and my fabulous discussions with Sidney Taylor Brown, I learned how her father actually lived, and all of the issues that followed his retirement. Of course, she was born in the early part of the 20th century, and it doesn't know that much about his early days. But to his credit, Major Taylor came out with a wonderful autobiography that again tells the rest of the story.
So if you're interested in getting a copy of the book, it's majortaylorstory.com. You can get it there. You can probably get it in all the usual places, but by all means, support your local bookshop, support the Major Taylor Story project. I think it's really an exciting book, and I'm glad you wrote it. Congratulations on it. And I can't wait to see the documentary too, which is, again, February 26th. It'll start streaming from WTIU in Indiana. John, thank you so much for talking with me and for writing this book. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Diane. It's been a pleasure.
My thanks to John for joining me on the show today. You can get a copy of The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot, at majortaylorstory.com. I think it's probably one you'll want in your cycling library. John also sent me a photo of the pacing tandem that he mentioned in our conversation from his collection, which you can find along with other links, photos, and a transcript of the show at outspokencyclist.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or X. And please feel free to leave a comment on our website, too. So until next time, stay safe, stay well, and remember, there is always time for a ride. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today on The Outspoken Cyclist with Diane Jenks. We welcome your thoughts and contributions on our Facebook page, or visit outspokencyclist.com to leave a comment on any episode. We will be back next week with new guests, topics, conversations, and news from the world of cycling. Subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app and you'll never miss an episode. The Outspoken Cyclist is a copyrighted production of DBL Promotions with the assistance of WJCU-FM Cleveland, a service of John Carroll University. Thanks again for listening, ride safely, and we'll see you next week.